let's get started. Obviously, we had the blog go out 3 parts this week. There's obviously been quite a lot of feedback. I put a call out on Twitter asking for questions, and a lot of them have focused on sort of 2 or 3 major areas.
Sure.
The big one, like we've got seem to have questions for the hardcore guys, the more casual guys, and then another little sort of bit off the side. So obviously from the hardcore end, one of the big things that people are concerned about is the changed lockout system. So they're sort of feeling like they have to do, like they've maybe removed LFR from the equation, but they also have normal heroic and then once progression begins, mythic raiding to do. And there's obviously concerns about that. So is that something that you guys have considered?
Definitely something we've considered. So I think that going from one tier to the next within the expansion, normal I think really shouldn't be in the picture.
Right.
Our plan structure is for mythic gear from, let's say, tier 17 to be better than normal gear from tier 18. So if you're a mythic raider, you'll largely ignore it. The same way, for the most part, you didn't really need flex items if you were fully Throne of Thunder heroic geared when Siege of Orgrimmar came out. We do understand, of course, the start of an expansion, when you're in Dungeon Blues, everything's an upgrade.
Yeah.
You're going to seek out every possible avenue of gear. I think we are cognizant, and we do realize that people often don't want to repeat the same content, that it both leads to a bit of burnout, it can shorten the lifespan of enjoyment of that content. And at the same time, we think that the structure that we have in place in terms of how we're building our raids is going to allow these groups to really make smart choices that will minimize the pain there for them. We recognize that if we were designing the game for hardcore raiders, for mythic raiders, we probably wouldn't have any form of separate lockouts. We probably would just kind of have this linear progression, you never go back, never do the same thing twice. But we feel like having separate lockouts and giving people the freedom to run activities with different social groups. You might do your main raid during the week, but then you do your, a lower difficulty with friends that you work with or that you know from a different server on the weekend. Keeping those windows open actually is a net benefit to the player base as a whole, even though, there's a certain compromise and a concession. I'm not necessarily expecting, and I don't really want to convince the hardcore raider, like, no, you should love this. Like, this is totally the best system for you. It's not. However, we think overall there's a lot of awesomeness in the system. I think some of the things we're doing to try to ease that pain are, we know that we have to build our raids differently in light of this. Siege of Orgrimmar is pretty much 14 bosses. That's pretty much linear. There's one little fork with Black Fuse versus Spoils. Throne of Thunder was completely linear. We're not doing that anymore. We're making a conscious effort to make our raids in Warlords in the style of, let's say, Firelands or Naxxramas, whether freeform open or winged, where really, if you only need something from this boss, we'll just zone in on heroic, go kill that one boss, and then resume your mythic raiding and progression without feeling like you need to re-clear 11 bosses just because someone needs an item from Black Fuse or Paragons.
Sure, and that's actually something that you touched on Twitter, the ability to, I think you put it as skip around bosses.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on how that works, particularly for someone who's doing mythic progression?
Well, so it's not right. So it's not completely freeform skipping. I think the best analogy really is think back to Naxxramas. Imagine that if you could somehow get attuned or keyed or whatever, where once you'd cleared each of the wings a few times, say 3 or 4 times, you could make or forge some crystal or rune or whatever that let you teleport directly to Saffron. So when you came in the next week, if you don't want to do the wings, you don't have to. Like, you've already proven that you can do that content. And so, to use a Siege of Orgrimmar example, again, imagine that you kind of unlocked a teleporter that took you right to Paragons from the entrance, so that you didn't have to re-clear the whole zone.
Okay, so that would allow people to basically just be like, right, we all need this trinket from boss 5, we can literally go straight there.
Exactly.
And how does that work then with people sharing those lockouts around other groups, more social groups? Is that mythic only? Is that for heroic as well?
No, I think it would work for all lockouts. I think we're the kind of thing that you'd individually kind of unlock for yourself through a quest or whatever, and then if someone in the group has completed that, then they can open the door for everybody.
For everybody. Okay, so you could then, it's like you could take your normal mode group and just be like, right, we're just going to do this boss. Okay, cool. That's definitely something that I think will help. And another thing which a lot of people have been talking about is the difference in the lockout. So obviously we've got the LFR we'll ignore for now. We've got normal and heroic, which are on this loot-based lockout, and then mythic, which is on a boss-based lockout. So what does that mean if, say, you're on boss 5 of blank for Mythic? Can you then hop into Heroic and clear that one and get the loot from that? How does those two lockout types work together?
Yes, they're completely separate. They don't overlap or interact in any way. So nothing that you've done on Mythic will in any way influence what your Heroic instance looks like or what is or isn't alive or lootable. I think that's kind of what we mean when we say completely separate lockouts.
Right.
Ultimately, we feel like a loot-based lockout, like flexible raiding works today, is sort of optimal for player freedom, flexibility. That's kind of the nature of it. You know, if you want to join your friend who's on boss 4 of a raid, you can do that, but then come back later in the week with a new pug or a different group and get bosses 1, 2, and 3. Whereas in a traditional lockout, you'd be locked out of doing bosses 1, 2, and 3 because you joined a raid where they were already a certain amount of progression in. Similarly, if you just want out of the goodness of your heart without any loot to help out your friend, someone sends you a battle tag message saying, hey, we're short a tank, can you come in for 30-40 minutes and help us out here? And they're real life friends on another server, you can go do that even if you've already cleared that raid for the week. You just won't get any loot, of course.
Sure.
Mythic is a different system. I think ultimately there we need traditional lockouts to ensure that those are the people who are most likely to power game and abuse some of the flexibility, and they're also the audience that's least likely to be wanting to group hop and server hop and Mythic raid with 4 different groups of friends. Mythic is for hardcore progression groups. We realize that. So we designed the system for them.
Okay, so then if you're and there's not is there the requirement to complete Heroic to go into Mythic, presumably?
Not anymore, actually.
Oh, okay, so you can literally, hypothetically speaking, take your dungeon blues and walk straight into Mythic.
You could. Mythic won't our plan is probably to unlock Mythic a week later than we unlock normal and Heroic, the same way we've traditionally unlocked Heroic a week later. But other than that, you're welcome to try if you want.
Cool. And so then does Mythic, it's completely separate. I'm sorry, because I had so many questions about these. I'm just going to keep clarifying.
No problem at all.
Is it the case that if you kill bosses 1 through 5 on Mythic, you can then go straight to boss 6 on Heroic, or they are just
completely separate?
So clearing bosses on Mythic gives you nothing in Heroic.
Correct. Right. If you log in on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night in Europe and you kill first 5 bosses in Mythic, then you zone out, switch to set the difficulty to Heroic, you're zoning into a completely fresh instance where nothing has happened. But this is why it's important for us to give some of that, non-linearity, wing structure, shortcuts, etc., so that if you just want to kill boss 6, you don't have to necessarily kill bosses 1 through 5 to get there in Heroic. Right,
sure. So you can, there's no unlocking wings in order type progression. You can walk into boss 1 of wing A, boss 1 of wing B, and so on and so forth. Cool, that sounds good. So as far as we mentioned raid unlocking briefly, what are you looking at as far as unlocking the different difficulties? Because I know historically LFR has been the slowest to unlock, and how is that going to work in Warlords?
I think largely unchanged. I think we're happy with the overall pacing structure that we had in Mists. One thing we did in Mists was have no raiding at all during the first week of the expansion. We're going to do that again. I think let people take their time, stop and smell the roses to an extent, instead of feeling like the clock was ticking, and if you didn't make it to max level to join your guild's first raid before the first week's lockout expired, you were permanently behind, and you could never recover. It was going to be terrible. This way you can actually, enjoy the process, pace yourself. And then, we're just going to, we will probably unlock normal and heroic simultaneously right away. And then Mythic will follow, along with LFR wings, which will unlock sequentially.
Cool.
And then that also, unlocking LFR wings sequentially has a couple of benefits and reasons for that.
Right.
It allows the population to focus on one section at a time, on learning new encounters at a time, at the same time, and kind of letting that experience and wisdom permeate throughout the community. The runs tend to be, at their messiest at the very start, when no one knows exactly what to do. So it's useful to kind of concentrate everybody also for queue purposes. Also, as part of the storytelling and the overall raiding experience, we prefer to give people who are raiding with their guilds and groups a chance to kind of see the story, to see the bosses first, before they essentially just go in an LFR and not really have it spoiled for them, but LFR is constructed with the expectation that you're going to win. And so it's nice to give people a chance to, get to Garrosh with their guild first, let's say, before they've started killing him in LFR a dozen times.
Sure thing, yeah, absolutely. And as far as we've mentioned the wings a couple of times, is it going to be unlocking, so say for sake of argument, Heroic and Normal in that second week of the expansion, are you going to be unlocking the entire raid, all of the raids?
Well, we have 2 separate raid zones. There is the High Ogre Capital that's in Nagrand, and then the Blackrock Foundry in Gorgrond.
Right.
The Ogre Raid is going to open up first.
Okay.
Much like Mogushon Vaults opened
Yeah.
up before Heart of Fear and Terra Civil in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then Blackrock Foundry, I would expect to see some weeks later.
And Blackrock Foundry is the one that we saw the preview map of at BlizzCon, which is looks like Faster Than Light.
Yes.
Cool. And so with these unlocks, is it going to be, you mentioned Mogushon Vaults, is that going to be a similar structure where you've got this half tier of eye level difference between the two? I think one of the things that people are wondering a lot about is how the eye levels are going to change, because we saw a lot of eye level escalation through Mists of Pandaria. Are there going to be smaller gaps between these tiers, or...?
Not necessarily. I think a little bit smaller in some places because we don't have item upgrades planned.
Right.
And it was very important for us. Like, one of our core philosophies is that we want you to go into a new raid zone, into a new tier, and actually get some upgrades. There's a couple of reasons why that's important. I know some Mythic Raiders are like, well, just let us go right into the next Mythic tier. Our Mythic gear from tier 17 should beat everything except tier 18 Mythic. There's two reasons why that's bad. First, a lot of guilds aren't like, let's say, Method or Blood Legion, who are initially completely blitzing through the lower difficulties and practically clearing, 2/3 of Mythic in the first week. They're slowly and steadily working their way through.
Yeah.
There are guilds today, to use Siege of Orgrimmar as an example, that are heroic guilds that are working on Paragons and Garrosh that maybe took several weeks to finish normal mode before they got into heroic. And then on heroic, they only kind of chipped away at a boss or two a week. And they were in a similar position at the end of Throne of Thunder. So if Throne of Thunder heroic gear had been better than Siege of Orgrimmar normal gear, those guilds' experience would have been a few weeks of just disenchanting every single thing that drops. You're working on bosses, you're killing them. There's actually no real hope of improvement to get you excited about every first kill. Like, if you kill a boss for the first time and you disenchant everything that drops, that feels like a failure to us. Separately, it also really goes a long way in terms of having more organic and granular tuning without us having to fine-tune and go in and tweak the bosses every couple of weeks. By definition, when Method gets to Black Fuse or gets to some fight, they're going to have much less gear than a guild that gets there 3 months later. And that's actually the only thing that sort of levels the playing field. Yeah. Because the reality is, if there wasn't any further room to grow gear-wise, either we would tune the encounter so it was a joke for Method, in which case they would complain, or we would tune it so that it was hard for them and completely impossible for everyone else, in which case we'd have to go back and massively nerf it.
Sure.
And this the fact that you can grow into gear from multiple sources as you go into a new tier allows the same content actually to serve multiple audiences over the course of several weeks.
Absolutely. And so then obviously I can anticipate the response to that being that the Mythic, the high-end hardcore raiders now feel that they have to kill everything on 3 difficulties to get the maximum level of upgrades.
I'd say 2 difficulties. I think so. I think that's the key. It's really not that different. Like, the same way the heroic Throne of Thunder Raider didn't really see much from Flex, a handful of overpowered trinkets notwithstanding, but we think we can avoid that problem this time around. Okay. The expectation is that most people will probably seriously look at 2 difficulties and then fairly quickly discard the lower of the 2 and then just be focused on just the single one.
Cool. So mentioned briefly the trinkets and things. One of the big questions, moving more away from the hardcore guys now, people are not understandably very, very concerned about the changes which are being made to LFR. So could you explain just kind of a bit more about the philosophy behind things like the different tier sets or the absence of tier sets and set bonuses from LFR? Sure. Different art models, what are you doing with the trinkets? A lot of people thought from the blog that there actually weren't trinkets in LFR at all.
That was an unfortunate choice of wording on there. Yes, there definitely are going to be trinkets from LFR. There'll be good trinkets, they'll be epic. They're just not going to be this mechanically transformative ones like Unerring Vision of Lei Shen or Root of Reimagination, that sort of thing.
Right.
So I mean, there's a few aims and purposes that we're trying to serve here. I think we've definitely viewed LFR, one of the great strengths of LFR is that it lets all players see and experience our raid content.
Yeah.
Those who once were not able to fight Illidan, to fight, Kel'Thuzad back in vanilla WoW, do get to fight Deathwing, they do get to fight Garrosh, they do get to see the conclusion of the stories that we've spent the entire expansion telling. Yeah. And it wasn't fair, really, to those players for us to be saying in prior years, well, okay, we're going to kind of give you this whole setup, this whole build-up, but then only like 5% of you actually get to see the end of the story.
Yeah.
Not ideal. Since we know that a lot of people, they basically, it's both a matter of desire and just time commitment and what their schedules look like. Some people can't commit to organized raiding on any kind of fixed schedule, or even can't afford to set aside a large enough block of time to join a pickup group. You know, they might have distractions, family in the background, whatever's going on. That's not the way they can play the game. We want them to be able to experience and see the content.
Right.
So we really want to focus LFR on that. I think that in Mists, we had set LFR up as this like very long-term end game that was supposed to occupy people's attention for weeks or months on end, and the loot pacing was structured accordingly. And this is something that's led to a lot of frustration. You know, if you go to the raid forums, you're always going to see your threads about loot RNG.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately you're going into Raid Finder and you're killing the same boss for the 10th, 11th, 15th time, trying to get that trinket or that weapon or, you know, that those couple of pieces that are eluding you. And that's frustrating. And I think we would like to improve that experience. We want to make it more rewarding and to let people get their loot faster.
Right.
Because I think one of the things I touched on the blog is that organized raiding with kind of a fixed group of people really does have a different lifespan and a different pacing, because you're going through learning new bosses week by week, and even if you don't get the upgrade for yourself, odds are it's going to someone in your raid, and so you're seeing your whole raid group's effectiveness improve. You get this sense of progression and variety.
Yeah.
And you're killing a new boss for the first time sometimes 3 or 4 months into the patch, and so you get this new exciting experience. With LFR, you're killing everything pretty much the first time you see it, assuming you've tuned it correctly.
Right.
So there isn't a new novel gameplay experience. It really does just come down to the loot, and it's not really fair or right of us to try to draw that process out over the course of months. We'd rather you get your loot in weeks rather than months.
Right.
Now, ultimately, in order to do that, we needed to make sure that we weren't overly incentivizing other players who are doing content beyond LFR to see LFR as the optimal avenue for gearing themselves up.
Right.
We want to like double the drop rates, basically.
Okay.
And if we did that with set pieces, with trinkets, the things that are what draws, you know, progression raiders and guilds that are doing higher levels of difficulty to this content, it would have clearly been the right thing for them to do.
Yeah.
And they really are separate tracks, and we're designing them as such.
Right.
We're seeing, you know, we expect normal mode dungeons, which don't have any kind of proving grounds requirement, for example. You can queue, we're very straightforward. The gear from those dungeons will prepare you to go into Raid Finder.
Okay.
That's kind of the one track that we see. For the solo player, you know, whether you're doing it on alt or your main or whatever, that's kind of the one track. And there's the other sort of more organized, group-oriented track, where you either have a pre-made group or you're doing proving grounds to qualify yourself for queuing for heroic dungeons. That gear will prepare you for normal, and then maybe you take further steps beyond that into higher levels of difficulty. But we don't really want those two tracks to intersect too much.
Right.
And we'd rather, you know, we want to keep the organized raider doing organized raids, the LFR raider doing LFR, and then if they want to take the next step, that's up to them. So ultimately, there's compromise here, you know,
Yes.
and again, I'm not, if we were designing the system solely for the LFR player, of course, I'm not seriously saying with a straight face, like, no, you should be excited about the fact that you're not getting tier sets anymore. Like, this
Yeah,
is,
for
no,
sure.
no, clearly, it's no different than, you know, when we nerf Warlock Shadowbolt, Warlock shouldn't be excited that we nerf Shadowbolt.
Yeah.
But we're doing it because it fits into a larger vision of how the game as a whole is going to be balanced into a single coherent entity that we think is going to be fun for everybody. So those are kind of the trade-offs that are involved.
Sure. So you're taking away the set bonuses. Is the LFR gear going to have any set bonuses at all, or is it going to be similar to dungeon gear in that it's standalone pieces?
Standalone pieces, though, I mean, our initial tier in general doesn't have set bonuses, period.
Right.
Like, there weren't sets available in Mogashan Vaults. Similarly, there won't be in the Ogre Raid. But it's going to be powerful epic gear that falls between dungeon gear and normal mode raid gear. The relative item level isn't really changing at all in that sense. So it's still going to be something that is a clear next step up for anything you were doing outside of raiding that will make you quite powerful in the outdoor world, whatever you're doing there, quite powerful in dungeons or other content that you're running. And again, if you want to take a next step beyond that, it's up to you.
Yeah, so that's another concern that people have had. We talked kind of about these two disparate gearing paths. And how you don't really want them to intermingle. I take it that what you mean by that is you don't want people who are doing normal and above to feel like they have to do LFR in order to gear. Is the gear available from Heroic Dungeons going to be good enough to stop people feeling like they have to do LFR?
It should.
Right.
I think the normal mode raid will be tuned around an expectation that you have Heroic Dungeon gear. Now, obviously, there's going to be some attractiveness to getting stuff from Raid Finder.
Yeah.
Though there'll be other sources of gear of that caliber. Through crafting, through garrisons, as players level up and unlock more aspects of their garrison, and can send their followers off on harder missions. Also, the daily challenge mode dungeon, we're going to have that offer a random piece of LFR quality loot for completing a challenge mode. So for players who really don't want to do LFR and would rather avoid it at all costs, there are alternate options. Now, is it there for you? And will some players decide that it is what they want to do, that it is the path of least resistance, the simplest way of getting this gear? Sure.
Yeah.
But at least that's a choice they're making and not something that they feel like they have to do.
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, that people will feel like they, quote-unquote, have to do another type of content. Do you feel that there's, like you've mentioned, something which we wanted to touch on it later on as well, but being the challenge modes, giving a piece of gear, and I believe, if I understand correctly, that you can get this, you can get the gear with relative regularity as well from doing the garrison. So as far as, if you're looking at it from a hardcore perspective, you have, you're leveling up, you've done your Heroic Dungeons, you've also got LFR, which can offer decent gear, you've also got garrisons, you've also got challenge modes. I'm assuming that the daily quests, we know that there's none of those happening at the start.
There are some daily quests in the game.
Quests.
It's not a daily quest oriented in-game experience.
Sure. So that does seem like there's actually an awful lot more content that's there which people could consider mandatory.
To an extent, I think that the people who are most likely to feel like it's mandatory are going to be moving past that step pretty quickly.
Right.
You're going to need to level up your garrison and your followers before you can run the missions that are going to actually give you any kind of raid quality gear, by which point the vanguard, the sort of cutting edge raiders, are going to have moved on past normal, certainly, to heroic and maybe even mythic difficulty. Similarly, Raid Finder is not going to be available from day one.
Sure.
Similarly, a lot of the crafting options that are in that category require multiple days worth of materials to make, kind of like the crafted blacksmith weapons from patch 5.2 at the Isle of Thunder. So when you're kind of the week 1, week 2 hardcore raider, the expectation, I think, if you want to maximize your ability to perform in raids, you'll probably want to do heroic dungeons and challenge modes, and maybe a couple, world boss, a couple of other specific outdoor objectives. But by and large, that's what you're going to be doing, and then moving on to raids.
Sure.
A couple of months later, there's going to be a much wider, broader tableau of things that you can draw upon, but that now we're more in catch-up territory, and now we're more past the initial rush, where the people who feel like they have to min-max every facet of their character are going to be doing that.
Yeah, I do feel like I agree with you, but I do feel like there's also the people in the middle who are the ones who aspire to that hardcore level, who this sounds more problematic for. Like, they're not the week 1 normal clear, heroic clear, straight into mythic group. They're the ones who are a few months behind everyone else, and they're sort of like, right now I've got all these sources of gear, what should I do? And do you feel that's a concern?
I don't know that it is. I think that ultimately it's more options. I mean, one of the dilemmas that we always have whenever we want to have any type of new content is, well, what should it give you? If it gives you relevant power rewards, then, oh no, it's mandatory. If it gives you nothing, then, oh, it's useless. Why would anyone do that? Why would I even bother making it? And so we're trying to strike a balance there, obviously. The person who is very determined and wants to catch up, and they want to gear up as quickly as possible and join a hardcore raiding guild, even though they joined the expansion a few months late, I think they'll appreciate the variety and diversity of options. I mean, the alternative would be we have fewer options, in which case maybe they're gated and they just can't catch up as fast as they want, or they're not gated, in which case they have to just kind of grind this one particular thing over and over again. I think diversity and variety are probably better there.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly reasonable. So, sorry, going back to the casual stuff again. We mentioned that the obviously LFR is something which you want to be a very quick way to see the content, and then moving into. Do you feel like people who are doing LFR now and are concerned about the change to the gear and want to progress? Do you feel like the new Group Finder's design is going to be good enough to cater to those people to move into Flex for more progression?
It should be tremendous improvement in terms of convenience. I mean, right now, you either have to use an add-on like OQ or a site like OpenRaid, both of which are great tools.
Yes, absolutely.
Or you hang out in trade chat in your capital city and maybe send tells to the person who's recruiting, who then rejects you because your item level is not, like, you're not heroic geared for his
Yeah.
flex group, and therefore that's unacceptable. Here it's going to be just a simple interface that you can pop open. It's, built into the standard queuing UI. This is a separate option for just Group Finder.
Right.
And you'll have dozens of groups to choose among at any time of day, any time of night. If one of them doesn't meet your liking, you can start your own. I think that the option of starting your own right now is very daunting. It's,
Yes.
okay, if I want to start my own raid, I need to, go to Open Raid and, make a whole new entry, or I need to start spamming in trade chat, and then trying to cobble together a group from scratch, versus just, I want to make a new raid for Foundry, Wing 1, minimum item level X, I need these roles, these classes, push the button, my group is listed. And then people suddenly will start applying because it'll show up.
Right.
I think one of the concerns we hear a lot today is people who want to get into flex groups, who, as I alluded to earlier, kind of feel that they're shut out of that by unreasonable item level requirements.
Yes.
Everyone wants you to have completely cleared the zone, to be fully flex geared or even normal geared,
Yeah.
which is natural. I mean, it's human nature to an extent. You want the smoothest run possible. If I have already spent a week or two wiping and learning these encounters, I want a group that also knows the encounters. I don't want to find a brand new group that is again going to spend hours wiping. Of course. So you want to maximize your success. But I think ultimately there's going to be a certain competitive pressure for raiders. When you go into the tool, you're not going to see groups that you don't qualify for. If someone has their unreasonable level 560 requirement flex group and you're at 535, you're not going to see it. You're only going to see the groups that you're eligible for.
Okay.
But the flip side then is that the lower you set the requirement, the larger the pool of potential recruits.
Right.
So the person with the 560 requirement might be sitting there trying to fill a group for an hour and a half, getting frustrated, whereas the person who has more reasonable requirements will actually get members.
Sure. And you mentioned also on Twitter previously about the can't request an item level higher than your own. Are there any other changes that you're making to, obviously adapting from systems like OQ to make it easier for players?
That's one of the major ones. I think we don't want to police it too much in the sense of hard coding certain things that then the game has to enforce, and there's an expectation of that. I think that ultimately there are social solutions to a lot of these things in a way that LFR doesn't typically offer, because in LFR you don't have a leader. There are some systems like vote to kick and all of that, but ultimately, you accept, and then there's this place for the leader to kind of set out a description at length if they want a couple of sentences of, if they're reserving some item for themselves, or if there's some requirement, or whatever voice chat they're using, they can put all those things out there. You know what you're getting into up front. And if you're a jerk, the leader will probably kick you from the group. And if the leader's a jerk, you will leave the group, and the whole group will probably leave. And then this is how pugs have run, ultimately. You go back to Ice Crown days, there were tons of pugs running Ice Crown all the time, and that's pretty much how they worked. And I think, once people have good experiences, run into a leader who they have a good run with, maybe you add that person to your friends list and look them up next time. And that's how longer lasting relationships and potential future guild ties are formed.
Absolutely. And so for the person who's only at first potentially able to do LFR, do you feel like that the gear that they're going to the gear they're going to get from LFR is going to be sufficient to get them into these flex groups? Do you anticipate it?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's certainly going to be a comfort for people, I think. And one other question that's come up is, again on LFR, is the art style. Why has the gear got its own distinct art style? There's a mixture of people who are feeling like, I'm going to have to run it for transmog, and also a mixture of people who are saying, but hang on, I want the tier gear style. So what's your thinking with that?
So this is something that we haven't, I don't think, formally discussed, but we're taking a bit of a new approach to how we are using our different types of art when it comes to armor in Warlords. What we've done all through Mists has been very color shift reliant.
Yes.
And that has a lot of shortcomings. There's 3 or 4 versions of the same set. There's currently, you have your tier 16 preset. There's the Raid Finder version, the Flex version, the normal version, the heroic version. When you see someone in town, you have to kind of be like, wait, does the red version mean that they're awesome? Does it mean that they're average? I don't know what it means. And there's no clear gradation there.
Okay.
Our plan actually is to go back to how things worked back in Burning Crusade, in a sense, where PvP and PvE armor actually share the same art, and that's where the recolors happen. So And instead use different models and different levels of like clear visual epicness to be this sliding scale from easily accessible to extremely elite.
Right.
So the LFR gear is actually going to have the same look as Honor gear. And then the raid sets are going to have the same look as Conquest gear on the PvP side. And then Mythic Raiders, or people who have the high-rated elite Conquest items, will have sort of an extra, some bonus flair on their art, even though it'll have the same basic look as the sets.
Okay, so sort of animations, things like the legendary cloak wings, that kind of stuff. Cool. That's. I think that'll make a lot of people very happy.
and ultimately, I mean, power isn't changing, right?
Sure.
It's all this. This goes back to, I remember, something I think Jeff Kaplan said talking about raiding in WoW like 10 years ago and how rewards were going to happen. It was that it wouldn't necessarily be that much more powerful, but it's about the cosmetic appeal. It's about your sword that's a bit more fiery than your neighbor's because you did something awesome. Yeah. And I think and there's almost, for people who want these transmog looks, nothing is stopping you from going back. Yeah. As we've seen, even when Tier 18 comes out, there'll be tons of groups that are steamrolling Tier 17, getting all those transmog collections, and you can do that through Group Finder.
Absolutely. So then just to mention something which came up that you just said just then, elite rated Conquest gear. Do you as far as we know, that it's going starter gear, veterans gear, Conquest gear in PvP. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So then the Mythic raiding gear is similar to the Conquest gear.
My understanding, so you may need to double check with Link on this,
right? But
my understanding is historically, there's been the requires 2200 rating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff.
That's purely cosmetic.
Exactly. That it's not going to be stronger. But that is the gear that will have this look, because that's the 2200 rated arena battleground population are kind of what matches the Mythic rating population in terms of prevalence.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to clarify that. So then moving into the more the more low level stuff, you mentioned in your blog that you would be, quote unquote, scaling back Valor and the incentive to cap Valor weekly. We've heard a lot about the removal of currencies. As far as I gather, Justice points are gone completely?
I think it's actually more that, I think it's more that Justice and Valor are being merged into each other, in a sense. And so Valor will be this thing that you get from running dungeons, from completing various content, but it's going to be used more for just pure catch-up and some of those retrospective items. Right. It's not going to be something that you need to do actively to supplement your cutting-edge progression.
So, to be more specific, what exactly are you going to be buying with Valor, and are you going to be earning similar quantities? Are you going to be, and what are you going to be using that for?
I think that's something that we're still nailing down the details of, but I would expect things like heirlooms, for example, which currently are used with a person with Justice. We're just kind of unifying them into a single currency. Right. And
so you mentioned earlier that item upgrades are being removed completely. That system just completely no longer exists in the game? Or?
Correct.
Okay.
Item upgrades are interesting. I think they, in a weird way, worked best when we disabled them periodically, which was a very odd design to communicate to players.
Right.
The most successful item upgrades, we've kind of had 3 iterations of how item upgrades have played out. When we first introduced them in 5.1, they were problematic because they were far too expensive for what they offered.
Yeah.
It cost 1,500 Valor to upgrade a single item fully, which was a week and a half worth of fully capping Valor, which meant 2 things. It meant that you could never hope to upgrade all of your items. Mm-hmm. It also meant that any single Valor point that you missed was putting you permanently behind. It also meant that anytime you upgraded an item that you replaced, you felt terrible. Yes. Because again, since you knew you were never going to cap, you were again permanently losing something that you could have put elsewhere. You're like, if only I'd upgraded my helm instead of my pants, now I replaced my pants, this is terrible. So it was way too expensive there. In 5.3, I would actually say it was fairly successful. We made it much cheaper, $250 per upgrade for 500 total, so 1/3 as expensive, which meant that you now could actually cap out all your items. But we also, because we introduced it in the middle of a tier, it kind of provided a boost to people who had kind of reached they sort of reached a plateau. They'd killed all the bosses that they could easily kill. Maybe they were kind of struggling with the last few. It just kind of gave them a shot in the arm to really start killing more things, and it helped organically in that way. And it was something that you could just kind of keep working on every week. Even if you didn't kill a boss, well, at least you got some Valor, your gear got better.
Yeah.
Keeping that system, though, in 5.4 meant that everyone came into the expansion, or into the patch, or many people did anyway, with pooled Valor, and 2,000 or 3,000 Valor kind of banked and ready to spend.
Yeah.
And so in that case, unless you earned gear phenomenally quickly, you probably were going to be limited by gear upgrades more than by Valor. So because like you'd have to get 6 new items just to exhaust your Valor, and even then you're earning an extra 500 to 1,000 a week. So it just became this extra step. Like, oh, I got an upgrade, okay, enchant it, reforge it, gem it, oh yeah, Valor upgrade it. And it lost any value that it had as a catch-up mechanism or a way for people who were coming in to content later on to have an advantage compared to those who were there early. It was just an extra thing that you did that we actually had to balance around because we knew that everyone's doing it to their items now.
Right.
And that's not that really isn't much value there. It's just an extra box to check on your item.
Absolutely. So you're going to be earning Valor, and then it will be used very much more like Justice as a currency, so you'll be retrospectively buying the last tier's upgrades, that sort of thing?
I think we need to figure out the exact sorts of things that are going to go on the vendors. I think it's not going to be upgrading your current items, and it's not going to be a vendor that offers raid quality items that are equivalent to the current tier.
Okay, so obviously then that if you're not able to do like the sort of Shadowpan Assault type structure where you're buying gear for Valor, then people I think are going to be considerably more worried about RNG. I heard mentioned somewhere, possibly on your Twitter, that you're increasing drop rates overall. Is that the case, or is that a misunderstanding? Like, what are you doing to mitigate the RNG fears, I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure. So I think to an extent we actually can increase drop rates a little bit without the sort of deterministic Valor vendor items that we know are going to supplement things that you get from raids. But also I think we want to make our bonus roll system more intelligent and more effective at letting players really target the items that they want. Right now a very common frustration is there's this trinket that I really want from, say, Dark Shaman. I really want Harem's Talisman. I bonus roll, I get a pair of boots. Okay. Kill them a couple more times, come back 3 or 4 weeks later, bonus roll again. I get excited, the item pops up, it's the same boots.
Yeah.
Now I'm just frustrated.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, Blizzard. You know that you've given me boots. Why do you keep giving me the same item? I couldn't possibly need this. So we think we can make that more intelligent and let players better sort of target and get the items that they haven't gotten yet from a given boss. And the other thing is, because of how we're changing itemization more broadly in terms of getting rid of, Holy Paladin int plate, for example. All plate will have strength and int on it. All mail armor will have agility and int. There's less niche gear that you have to disenchant, or the second pair of Holy Paladin gloves drops and you only have one Holy Paladin in your raid, which in turn means that there will be more items that are useful to more people in the raid. So while you may end up chasing the white whale of like that perfect item with the ideal secondary stats that you want in a slot, there'll be more items in general that could fill that slot. So you're not going to find yourself with these bracers that you haven't upgraded in 5 months. Yeah,
absolutely. So just to clarify, so then the bad luck protection is adding in this element of preventing duplicate items.
Yes.
Is that's only applicable to the bonus roll, the Warforged Seal equivalent?
Yes.
Not to just your basic roll that you would get with personal loot enabled off any given boss.
Correct.
And how is that going to work then? You mentioned the I'm going to call it Warforged for clarity, the Warforged or the Socketed or the tertiary stat items. How is that like? So say you get the basic boots, which they're not Warforged, they're not Socketed, they don't have a tertiary stat. How is that system then going to work with the upgrades?
So yes, one of the common complaints or the rejoinders from people who hear about the system is, well, no, but what if I want to keep getting more of those boots? So I mean, every time you kill the boss every week, that is a chance to get that extra pair of boots. So if you have it and you want the Warforged version, you want the Warforged Socketed version, you still have your chance of getting it every single week just based on killing it, regardless of whether or not you spend your bonus roll. Now, if a boss, let's say, has 2 items, and you win the first item on the first bonus roll, later on, your bonus roll will not give you that item again, it will give you the other one.
Right.
But then if you bonus roll a 3rd time, you're actually back to an even choice.
Right.
So it's not like it's permanently locked out, it's more that we are skewing the odds heavily in favor of the one that you haven't gotten yet.
Gotcha. So it's not the case that you get boots off that boss and you're never going to see another pair of boots.
And the thing is, like, it feels like one of those niche theoretical concerns.
Yeah.
Because even the fairly lucky player doesn't typically find themselves at a point where they've got every item they want and they're using their bonus rolls every week on bosses they've already fully looted just to hope for a Warforged version of that one. Like, once you get to that point, you're pretty late in a tier, and it's a pretty niche thing ultimately.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's just something that people examine the system and
for sure
want to have answers to. So the bad luck protection, I think part of the problem with it is that people don't really understand how it works.
And we don't want you to. Sorry. I mean, it's there's an invisible hand behind the scenes that is trying to avoid really unfortunate streaks from happening.
Sure.
At the end of the day, it's largely random, right? It's the essence of most random distributions ends up being something like a bell curve, and you have the two tails to the curve. You have that one ridiculously lucky person who's like, I always get loot from every boss I kill. I don't know what do people complain about. I don't exactly hate that guy. We don't do anything to stop that guy.
Yeah.
He can still keep being as lucky as he is. Then at the other end, you have that person. When you have as many millions of people playing the game, you're going to have those extreme fluke outliers of the person who, like, literally, I have run Raid Finder 5 weeks straight. I've killed 70 bosses. I've lost every single roll. What's going on? This is a joke. That's who we want to fix, right? And so we want to just kind of chop off that tail end of the bell curve, make sure that if you're starting to creep towards being that person, we don't want you to have that experience.
Sure.
But ultimately, they're going to have good luck streaks, bad luck streaks, but overall, at least it's not going to be extreme.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, obviously, the Warforged Seal type of mechanic is how this is going to work. How are you going to be obtaining those in Warlords?
This is something that we're still discussing. I think that overall we're really happy with how the bonus roll system worked out, how it kind of allowed outdoor content and things that you did to feed into your raid progression in a way that felt useful no matter what type of content you were doing. Because if we just give you an item, either that item is amazingly best in slot for the Raid Finder player or worthless for the Mythic player or somewhere in between, whereas here it's just functionally, you have to kill the boss anyway, it just gives you an extra shot. One thing we noticed in Mists was the players tended to find their most efficient route for gathering lesser charms.
Yes.
And you might have dabbled in a variety of content early on, then you kind of realized, well, no, this is the best way of getting lesser charms.
I'm just going to kill frogs.
And you just go do that every week, which is a little narrower than we would have liked. So our current thought is actually to add a bit more granularity to the system. Imagine you go to your garrison, and for the week, there are a variety of quests to choose among, each of which gives you one Warforged seal. And they're chosen from a random pool. So this week it's going to be clear a heroic dungeon, go, kill X Warsong orcs in Nagrand and do something akin to dailies for one seal, go do Ashran, go do a variety of things. And we want to give you some choice in the matter, but this way you're doing more randomized, discrete activities for one seal at a time. Which also means if you only have time to get 1 or 2 seals, you can get 1 or 2 seals.
And instead is that 3 seal cap still going to exist in that system? Right, so you can get a maximum of 3
per week, but 1 at a time. Instead of go do this huge block of stuff and turn it in for all 3 at once.
Yeah, that sounds like quite an improvement. And one thing that's come up a lot in the discussions I've seen around this interview is you've obviously, I can't imagine there was a world exists where you haven't seen Thek's cumulative loot idea. For those who haven't, this seems to be, as far as I understand it, it's a system where you kill boss 1, for sake of argument, on Mythic, and you also get loot rolls on boss 1 heroic, boss 1 normal, and maybe, I can't remember if you said boss 1 LFR or not. What's your take on that system? It's something that seems to come up a lot and be going around lately.
I mean, yes, it's something I've seen in the last couple of days and been thinking about. Definitely an interesting idea. I see why it definitely has a lot of appeal to the hardcore raider who is concerned about the need or ability to run these things multiple times. I think that the 2 main downsides that I see to it are, first, that it actually would lead to a tremendous amount of just loot clutter. It's you kill a 20-man mythic boss with a 20-player raid, and you're now also getting, in addition to what's on the corpse, personal loot rolls for heroic and normal, presumably. And so suddenly, 20 some odd items have been distributed to your raid as a whole. Most of those are going to get vended or disenchanted, since by definition you actually don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
It would cause a glut in the market for disenchanting materials, things like that. And a lot of the time, you actually don't need that loot. And we think our system is such that we can graduate you out of wanting or caring about normal and heroic loot quickly enough that you're not going to feel the need to do it, in which case this is more just kind of it's just glut. It's us throwing gold and enchanting materials at you.
Oversolving the issue.
It feels like a little bit of an oversolve, frankly.
Right.
Also, I can imagine players being like, wait, can I pick a different specialization? Like, I want off-spec loot for my heroic,
Yeah.
because that's what I care about, but I still want main spec for mythic. It just
Yeah.
adds a tremendous amount of complexity. And finally, there is some value in a little bit of a perk to the mythic raider who's done their mythic raid, who then gets an invite from their friend who says, hey, can you help, Ret Paladin, who says, hey, you sort of have a prot set, right? Can you tank my normal or heroic group with my friends because we're short somebody? It's nice for them to not just be doing that at the goodness of their heart, but also potentially say, okay, I might be able to get some heroic quality off-spec gear out of doing this, even though it's not really part of my main progression track. And if all that is just kind of front-loaded to you when you're doing Mythic, it removes that slight incentive. And yes, doing things out of the goodness of your heart is nice, but there's also some value to being able to tell yourself, like, okay, I'm getting something useful for my character while doing this.
Absolutely. So the loot specialization system, which we currently have in this, is going to continue to exist in exactly the same setup. Awesome. So another thing which has come up a lot is 5-mans. I know it's not specifically the target of your raiding blog, but I suspect that you have a very good knowledge of what's going on there. And one big thing that people want to know is, will 5-mans be added regularly throughout the expansion, or will we see a Myst-style front-loaded system?
We want to.
Right.
We don't have anything specific to announce at this point, but definitely have heard loud and clear that players miss having those mid-expansion additional 5-player dungeons, like the End of Time, the Dragon Soul accompaniment, the Ice Crown accompaniment. I think one of the problems that we've discussed in the past that we've been trying to figure out a good solve for is the tendency of introducing a couple of new dungeons to completely obsolete a much larger group of dungeons, right? In patch 4.1 in Cataclysm, we released Zul'Aman and Zul'Gurub, which at the time was like, okay, what items do they drop? If they dropped items that were on par with the initial heroic dungeons, then they would have felt largely pointless and irrelevant. People would have done them once or twice, just for the sake of, okay, new content, and then not really gone back. It just would have been part of the larger pool. So we didn't do that. We made them drop better items, which in turn then made it so that you felt silly for queuing for any of the lower heroic dungeons, and we replaced a diverse, vibrant tier of content with 2 troll dungeons. And they were fun dungeons, they were good dungeons,
they were.
but when it felt like the right thing to do was to just run these 2 dungeons over and over again, there wasn't a whole lot of variety there. And I wish we had the ability, I wish we could say, like, okay, we're going to add like 8 dungeons in a patch. Unfortunately, that's not quite realistic. So we've always been trying to come up with a solve for that. One thing that we might do, for example, if we add new dungeons later on in the expansion, would be to also at the same time add mythic versions of our existing heroic dungeons, which could have the same quality of loot. So then we're adding new content that drops better loot, but then also updating the old content to keep it relevant.
Absolutely. So then that sort of answers my next question of, if you were to do these dungeons partway through, you'd be then increasing the loot quality of those dungeons to the sort of the catch-up style that you had in Kata.
We would have to, yes.
Absolutely. So then would that be a risk of removing the necessity of people running the older raids? Or would you be doing it right, like the Zul'Aman Zul'Gurub dungeons were 353 to the normal mode tiers 359? Is that where you'd be sort of looking to pitch it?
Exact item level, I think.
Sure.
A lot of that, a lot of those calls are actually difficult to make in advance. They're based on us taking a hard look at the player base and where they're at that moment in time. So let's say we introduce new dungeons in 6.1 or 6.2 or something, we would look a few weeks prior even at what the item level distribution looks like on the live servers, because we don't want to undershoot or overshoot the mark. Because that's really who it needs to be for.
Okay. And as far as scenarios go, do you have initial launch scenarios? Are we going to be seeing the heroic normal scenario thing again?
So I think that we have tons of scenarios that are actually integrated into the level up experience. We were very happy with how things like the Isle of Thunder major event unlocks worked out as sort of ways for us to have really epic storytelling moments. These scenarios won't be the sort of thing that you just queue for from the interface. They'll be launched organically as you play through the story. They're designed to be solo scenarios that you can bring in any of your friends that are with you. We think it's important that, if you're questing with a group of friends, we don't want to break you up into 4 separate instances. You can keep doing what you're doing together. At max level, a lot of our scenario plans actually involve the garrison currently, and garrison invasions, and the idea of dynamic events that can occur where you have to defend your garrison for various types of attacks. And we're looking to expand and do more with the scenario system going forward into the expansion.
Right. So that's something that's very sort of, there's not like the max level heroic and normal dungeons as we see them existing in Mists of Pandaria set up right now?
Not right now.
Okay.
I think scenarios worked very well as catch-up, and when they were introduced midway through Mists. The initial scenarios, I think, largely, it wasn't quite clear. While they were a novel type of content, their reward wasn't really clear where it fit in. People kind of checked them out for the first week or so, and then dungeon loot was better than the scenario items. LFR opened up, and there just wasn't a whole lot of reason to do them.
Absolutely. One thing that was mentioned at BlizzCon was this stacking the deck buff for pre-made groups. Is that still in, and if are you doing anything else to incentivize group play?
It's something we want to do. We're thinking through exactly what the incentive is going to be.
Right.
Since I think the original thought was, oh, you get extra valor, but that's not
Yeah,
going to be quite
not
as appealing a
so
carrot
well.
anymore. So
Yeah, absolutely. So it's still something you're still looking at, basically.
yes.
As far as, so the garrisons are obviously a huge thing, and I think there's something that there is some concern floating around, particularly again from this mandatory content group. How you mentioned on Twitter, which I was so pleased to see, by the way, that they're not like if you LFG your way straight through the leveling curve, you're not going to be missing out. How is it integrated into the gameplay of someone who is really raid focused and not interested that much in questing?
I think we're designing the system to be fun, have a lot of depth, and be attractive, and we want you to do it for its own sake.
Right.
We're not planning on tying sort of mandatory raid type things like your Warforged bonus rolls or the like into the system or into leveling up the system. You're going to get your garrison very early on in Draenor, like very, very early on. You sort of, you have your initial adventure, and then one of the first things you do is stake a plot of land that's your own.
Right.
As you quest and level up through Draenor, you will be kind of unlocking buildings, unlocking blueprints, gathering followers, and building up your garrison and outlying outposts across the continent to help you take on the Iron Horde. The story of leveling in Draenor, or the story of Draenor, is very much intertwined with your own personal heroism, but also the army that you're raising and the base that you're building.
Right.
Now, if you want to bypass that, that's your prerogative, right? If you want to do battlegrounds, if you want to do dungeons, you will, you'll get your garrison, then you can start chain queuing dungeons from level 90 to 100. Then you can go back and buy these blueprints with gold that you would have unlocked for, like, if you quested, you would have unlocked them for free.
Sure.
But if you don't want to do that for whatever reason, you can still opt into the system and get that stuff at max level. We see it in terms of pure player items as a source of sort of parallel catch-up gear. It's not going to be the sort of thing that I would expect any Mythic Raider feels is going to give them relevant items.
Right.
It absolutely will be something where if you're the Raid Finder player or the more casual friends and family player doing normal, and you want to supplement or get a handful of extra items by building up your followers and setting them on difficult raid missions, it will definitely be attractive there, but we're less concerned about that group feeling, again, obligated to partake in this type of gameplay.
Sure.
We want it to feel rewarding.
Sure.
The biggest integration really is with professions, and profession crafting will flow through the garrison, but again, with the removal of the passive perks that every profession currently has for just skilling up to max, that really is more of an economic choice. It's like if you want to make gear for yourself, or if you want to make items to sell in the auction house to make gold, then yes, you'll want to be involved in your garrison. But that's a far cry from like I need to maximize my DPS to kill this raid boss.
Absolutely, yeah. So with that, you mentioned the loot item, which was something which people have asked about again. The time investment, I think, is something which people are concerned about, particularly following, like, obviously the daily quests issue in 5.0.5.1. As far as the time investment goes in your garrison, is it something you're going to be doing in order to get this bonus loot for your character? Is it something that you'd be looking at doing every day, once every 3 days, maybe once a week if you feel like it?
It's a very large, rich, deep system, but it's not designed to be super time intensive.
Right.
The nature of the missions, as we discussed at BlizzCon, they're things that play out in real time. You send your followers out on a mission, and then it's like, they're going to come back in 48 hours. You're not doing anything for 48 hours, you check back in at some point. We have a system that we've kind of internally been calling a capacitance system, where you basically have kind of a backlog of missions that can build up. The same thing applies to crafting in terms of using your crafting cooldowns, so that, if you check in on Monday, then again on Thursday, you'll have 4 days worth of stuff there to be done all at once.
Right.
So you don't feel like, just because I missed a couple of day logins, I've somehow really lost out.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if you go for a couple of weeks without logging in, yes, at some point there's a cap, but that's the nature of everything. That's weekly lockouts, and we've tried to move towards a structure where you're incentivized and rewarded for participating on a weekly basis. But the second you come home, late at night after a long day at work or after a fun night out with friends, and you just want to go pass out, and you have this nagging thought like, oh crap, I need to log on and do my dailies. Like, I need to... We want you to play because you want to play, not because you feel like there's that nagging thought of like, oh, if I don't do this, I'm going to fall behind. And a weekly structure for things really lends itself so much better to that, because I think most people can plan out good times in their schedule over the course of a week, whereas night by night we all have bad and busy days.
And is that weekly sort of structure that you're looking at there going to be echoed within the Valor gains from Dungeons? Because I know a lot of people were less satisfied with the Mist system than they were with the Cataclysm system.
I see the Mist system still as ultimately being weekly, because there isn't any permanent loss. It's a weekly cap of Valor, and we reward you for your extra for your first of the day. But you can still get Valor for your second or 10th of the day if you so choose. The sort of optimal, hyper time-efficient way, if you want to reduce the number of minutes required, is to do one a night. But if you miss a couple of nights, it's no big deal. I think all the time people have seen, just run a couple of extra heroic scenarios on a Saturday, and you more than make up for it. Which I think is a far cry from the Wrath system, where it was your daily dungeon quest. If you didn't go talk to that guy outside Violet Hold and Dalaran and get your quest, you just permanently missed out on badges for the week, and there's nothing you could do to make up for them.
Absolutely. Awesome. I'm sensitive of the time. Is there anything I've missed that you really wanted to get out there?
Let's see. Nothing. I think it's been pretty thorough. Nothing too major. I mean, I think really just the broader philosophical point that... I've been very closely following all the discussion in the aftermath of the blog the last few days. A lot of passionate viewpoints on both sides, or on all sides really, since there's multiple. One thing that always makes me a little bit sad is the way in which the issue so often tends to be framed as casual versus hardcore, or elitists versus everybody else, and that we're somehow picking sides or catering to one at the expense of the other. Now, ultimately, we're trying to, make a large game that will offer fun and exciting and awesome things for all types of players. And we're trying to strike a balance. We're trying to compromise. None of our choices, none of our decisions here are us saying we want to elevate this playstyle over that one, or this group of players over that one. It's more that we are trying to craft a fun, balanced, engaging game and be mindful of everyone's concerns. So keep the feedback coming. Completely appreciate that it comes from a place of passion, and that, players are excited about what we're doing, excited about the game, but it's not, it's not about us versus them. We want everyone to win. We want everyone to enjoy their time in the game.
Awesome. Great. That's 10:59. That'll do. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.